The biting wind howled across the plains of Wyoming Territory. 1878, rattling the windows of Lorelei Barrett's tiny homestead cabin like death himself, demanding entry. Curled beneath threadbare blankets, she coughed violently, the sound echoing in the empty cabin she'd inherited from her uncle just 4 months prior. At 22, Lorelei had left everything behind in Boston after her parents' passing, determined to claim her independence on the frontier. But now, with winter approaching and illness ravaging her body, that dream seemed to be slipping away. "You won't last till Christmas, miss," Doc Wilson had told her last week in town, his voice tinged with pity as he handed her medicine she could barely afford. "These plains have broken stronger souls than yours. Best sell what you can and take the next train east." "She's too stubborn to listen," Mrs. Henderson had whispered loudly to her husband as Lorelei exited the general store. "Poor thing doesn't understand what's coming. No family, no husband, that broken-down homestead. She won't survive winter." Lorelei struggled to sit up, her chest tight with each breath. The illness had started as a simple cold 3 weeks ago but had steadily worsened. Outside, the first snow of the season was beginning to fall, dusting the barren landscape. Her wood supply was dangerously low, her pantry nearly empty. The cow had stopped giving milk last month, and she'd been forced to slaughter her only chicken yesterday. She pulled herself to her feet, swaying slightly as dizziness overtook her. The floor was cold beneath her bare feet as she shuffled to the window. In the distance, she could see dark clouds gathering, promising more snow, more cold, more isolation. A sudden movement caught her eye, a rider approaching from the west, moving at a steady pace despite the worsening weather. Visitors were rare out here, especially with winter setting in. Lorelei squinted, trying to make out details through the swirling snow. The rider wore a dark coat and wide-brimmed hat, sitting tall in the saddle of a powerful chestnut horse. A knock at her door startled her. How had he arrived so quickly? Or had she lost track of time staring out the window? Lorelei grabbed her shawl, wrapping it tightly around her shoulders before opening the door a crack. "Afternoon, madam," came a deep voice. The man before her stood well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and weather-worn. His face was partially obscured by a thick beard, but his eyes, a startling blue, were kind. "Thomas Blackwood. I work at the Double R Ranch about 10 miles west. Was passing by and noticed your chimney's not smoking. Everything all right?" Lorelei opened her mouth to respond but was seized by another coughing fit. She gripped the doorframe to steady herself. The man Thomas stepped forward with concern. "Madam, you're ill." "I'm fine," she managed, though they both knew it was a lie. "Just a small cold." Thomas's gaze took in her pale complexion, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she trembled despite the shawl. Then he looked past her to the cold hearth, the sparse furnishings, the evidence of a woman barely hanging on. "They said in town there was a Boston lady out here trying to work her uncle's claim," he said slowly. "Said you wouldn't make it through winter." Lorelei stiffened, pride temporarily overshadowing her weakness. "They're wrong. I'll manage just fine, Mr. Blackwood." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Not if you don't have firewood, you won't." He glanced at the nearly empty woodpile beside her cabin. "And not if that cough gets worse." His expression softened. "Miss Barrett, Lorelei Barrett." "Miss Barrett, I don't mean to impose, but winter's coming early this year. First big storms rolling in tonight." He nodded toward the darkening sky. "They say you won't survive winter." His eyes met hers directly. "Not if I can help it." The declaration hung between them, simple and profound. Lorelei had never been one to accept charity, had prided herself on facing challenges alone. But as another coughing spell racked her body, she recognized the truth: she was dying, slowly but surely, and this stranger might be her only hope. "I don't need saving, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice weaker than she'd intended. "Everyone needs help sometimes, Miss Barrett." He removed his gloves. "Now I'm going to chop some wood for your fire, and then we'll see about getting some hot food in you. Doctor in town gave me some medicine for my mother, but she passed before needing it. Might help with that cough." Before she could protest further, Thomas had already turned toward her woodpile, removing his heavy coat to reveal a wool shirt stretched across powerful shoulders. Lorelei watched as he expertly swung her axe, splitting logs with an efficiency she'd never managed despite weeks of trying. Within an hour, a fire blazed in her hearth, warming the cabin for the first time in days. Thomas had brought in supplies from his saddlebags: coffee, jerky, dried apples, and a small bottle of medicine. He'd insisted she take a spoonful immediately, then set about making a simple broth. "Why are you helping me?" Lorelei asked, huddled near the fire, a cup of hot coffee warming her hands. "You don't know me." Thomas stirred the pot hanging over the fire. "My ma came out here as a young widow with me, just a boy. Neighbors helped us survive our first winter. Out here, helping isn't charity, it's how we all stay alive." He looked up at her. "Besides, seems to me you've got spirit. Frontier needs more of that, not less." As darkness fell, the storm arrived in full force. Wind howled around the cabin corners, snow accumulating rapidly outside. Thomas checked the windows, adding rags to block drafts where he found them. "I should head back," he said, though they both knew it would be dangerous in such weather. "You'll freeze to death," Lorelei said. "The storm." He nodded, a decision made. "I'll sleep by the fire if you don't mind. Head out at first light." Lorelei agreed, relief flooding through her at not having to face the night alone. As she drifted to sleep that night, warmer and better fed than she'd been in weeks, with the steady presence of Thomas Blackwood keeping watch from across the room, she wondered if perhaps there was hope for her frontier dream after all. Morning brought eerie silence as Thomas stepped outside to assess the damage. Lorelei followed, wrapped in her thickest shawl, to find a world transformed. Snow blanketed everything in sight, pristine and beautiful, yet treacherous. At least 2 feet had fallen overnight, with drifts twice that height against the north side of her cabin. "This is bad," Thomas said, surveying the landscape. "Storm came earlier and harder than anyone expected." Lorelei's heart sank. "How will you get back to your ranch?" "That's not what concerns me." His eyes met hers. "You've got maybe 3 days of firewood, even with what I cut yesterday. Your pantry's nearly empty, and that cough." He shook his head. "You need a doctor, but town's unreachable in this snow." "I told you I'll manage," she insisted, though her body betrayed her with another coughing fit. Thomas waited until it passed. "Miss Barrett, I respect your independence, but I made a promise to help, and I intend to keep it." He gestured to the vast whiteness around them. "This is just the beginning. Winter's barely started, and you're in no condition to handle what's coming." He outlined his plan simply. He would return to the Double R Ranch, explain the situation to his employer, and bring back supplies. Food, medicine, firewood, enough to see her through until she recovered her strength. "I can't pay you," Lorelei admitted, shame coloring her cheeks. "The last of my money went to taxes and that useless medicine from Doc Wilson. I'm not asking for payment." Thomas checked his saddle, preparing his horse for the difficult journey. "Just promise you'll keep that fire going and take the medicine I left. I'll be back by tomorrow evening if the weather holds." Lorelei watched him ride away, a solitary figure soon swallowed by the vastness of white. She wondered if she'd see him again, or if the promise of help was just another false hope in a life that had offered too many already. true to his word. Thomas returned the next day as dusk approached. Not alone, but with a wagon drawn by two powerful draft horses, laden with supplies. Another man rode alongside, older, with silver hair beneath his hat. "Miss Barrett," Thomas called as he approached the cabin. "This is Mr. Richard Reynolds, my employer." The older man tipped his hat. "Miss Barrett, Thomas here tells me you're determined to make a go of this homestead." "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice stronger after a day of rest and medicine. "It was my uncle's dream, and now it's mine." Reynolds studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Got a proposition for you, then. Double R Ranch needs this territory for winter grazing. Your land sits right in the middle of our usual route." Lorelei stiffened. "I'm not selling." "Not asking you to," Reynolds said. "Proposing a partnership. We provide supplies, protection, help with the heavy work. Come spring, you allow our cattle limited grazing rights across the northwest section of your property." Thomas began unloading the wagon sacks of flour and beans, salt pork, coffee, sugar, canned goods. There was medicine, candles, lamp oil, and thick woolen blankets. Most precious of all, the wagon carried a cord of split firewood. "Why would you do this?" Lorelei asked suspiciously. Reynolds glanced at Thomas, something unspoken passing between them. "Thomas speaks highly of your determination. Says you've got the heart for frontier life, just need a fair chance." He gestured to the supplies. "This arrangement benefits us both. You survive winter, establish your claim properly. We get grazing rights without having to buy more land." It was a generous offer, too generous for simple grazing rights. Lorelei suspected there was more to it, but was in no position to refuse. "I accept your terms, Mr. Reynolds," she said formally, extending her hand. They shook on it, a contract as binding as any legal document. As Reynolds prepared to depart, he took Thomas aside. Their conversation was brief, but seemed to end with Reynolds nodding in approval. The older man mounted his horse, tipped his hat once more to Lorelei, and rode away. "He's giving me leave to stay and help you get settled," Thomas explained as they carried supplies inside. "Just until you're back on your feet." "I can't ask that of you," Lorelei protested. "You didn't ask, I offered." Thomas stacked firewood beside the hearth. "Besides, that storm damaged your roof. Needs fixing before the next one hits." For the next week, Thomas worked from dawn until dusk. He repaired the roof, reinforced the barn, chopped enough firewood to last a month, and hunted fresh meat to supplement their stores. Lorelei, slowly regaining strength thanks to proper food and medicine, insisted on helping where she could, cooking meals, mending Thomas's shirts, taking over smaller chores. They developed a routine, sharing quiet evenings by the fire. Thomas proved to be well-read despite his rugged appearance, exchanging thoughts on books they'd both enjoyed. Lorelei spoke of Boston, of parents who'd valued education for their daughter despite society's limitations. Thomas shared stories of growing up on the frontier, learning ranching from his mother who'd refused to be driven off her land after his father's death. "She sounds remarkable," Lorelei said one evening, knitting by firelight as Thomas cleaned his rifle. "She was." His voice held both pride and old grief. "Taught me that strength isn't always about muscle. Sometimes it's about facing each day when everything seems impossible." He looked up, his gaze meeting hers. "Reminds me of someone else I know." The compliment warmed her more than the fire. In Boston, men had praised her beauty or her family's status, never her strength or determination. Thomas saw something in her that others, including herself lately, had missed. As December deepened, so did their connection. Thomas taught Lorelei practical skills: how to shoot accurately, track game, predict weather from cloud patterns. She shared her knowledge of herbs and plants, having studied botany in school. Together, they organized her uncle's chaotic records, discovering that her property was more valuable than she'd realized, with water rights that could prove essential come summer. "Your uncle was smart to claim this land," Thomas observed, studying the hand-drawn maps. "He just didn't have the resources to develop it properly." "Neither do I," Lorelei admitted. "Not alone," Thomas agreed. "But that Reynolds offer is just the beginning. You've got options." They were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Thomas instinctively moved toward his rifle before recognizing the pattern: 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 more. "It's Will from the ranch," he explained, opening the door to admit a young cowboy stamping snow from his boots. "Mr. Reynolds sent me," Will announced, handing Thomas a letter. "Says it's important." Thomas read quickly, his expression darkening. "There's trouble. Cattle rustlers hit the north pasture. 3 men injured." He looked at Lorelei apologetically. "I have to go back." "Of course," she said, ignoring the dismay that washed over her. "Your job, I'll return when it's settled," he promised. "You have supplies to last several weeks. The medicines, I know how to use them." She forced a smile. "I'm much stronger now, thanks to you." Within the hour, Thomas was gone, riding alongside Will into the gathering dusk. The cabin, so alive with conversation and shared purpose for weeks, fell silent. Lorelei moved through her evening routine mechanically, trying to ignore how empty each room felt without his presence. 2 weeks passed with no word. December gave way to January, bringing bitter cold that tested all of Thomas's repairs. Lorelei maintained her strength, following the regimen he'd established: taking medicine, eating well, keeping the fire stoked. She even ventured out on calm days to check her snares, bringing home rabbits and once a fox with a luxurious pelt she carefully preserved. On the 15th day after his departure, as Lorelei was kneading bread dough, hoofbeats approached. She rushed to the window, heart pounding, but instead of Thomas's familiar figure, she saw 3 strange men riding toward her cabin. Something about their approach spread out, moving cautiously triggered an instinct. Lorelei quickly checked Thomas's rifle, making sure it was loaded as he'd taught her. She positioned herself near the window, partially concealed, and waited. "Hello, the house," called the lead rider, a thin man with a scar bisecting his left cheek. "Anyone home?" "State your business," Lorelei called back, keeping the rifle out of sight but ready. The men exchanged glances. "Just passing travelers, madam," the scarred man replied. "Looking for a place to warm up, maybe trade for some supplies." "I have nothing to trade," she answered. "Double R Ranch is 10 miles west if you're truly looking for hospitality." At the mention of the ranch, the men's expressions shifted subtly. The scarred man dismounted despite her lack of invitation. "Now, that's not very neighborly," he said, his tone hardening as he approached the door. "Woman alone out here should be more welcoming to visitors." "I'm perfectly fine on my own," Lorelei replied, raising the rifle to make it visible through the window. "Please move on." The man stopped, reassessing the situation. "That's a big gun for a little lady. You even know how to use it." "Center mass, steady breath, gentle squeeze," she recited Thomas's instructions. "I can hit a rabbit at 50 yards. You're considerably larger and closer." The standoff stretched for several tense moments before the scarred man laughed. "Feisty one, aren't you?" He backed toward his horse. "Maybe we'll come back when you're feeling more sociable." "I wouldn't advise it," came a familiar voice from behind them. Lorelei's heart leaped as Thomas emerged from the tree line, rifle trained on the intruders. 2 more riders flanked him, Will and another double R cowboy. "Blackwood," the scarred man spat. "Should have known you'd be mixed up in this." "Dalton." Thomas's voice was deadly calm. "You boys are a long way from your usual territory." "Free country," Dalton replied. "Just having a friendly chat with the lady." "She's under double R protection," Thomas stated. "And you're trespassing." Tension crackled between them, hands hovering near weapons. Lorelei kept her rifle steady, though her heart raced. Finally, Dalton shrugged elaborately. "No harm meant. We'll be on our way." As he mounted his horse, he tipped his hat mockingly toward Lorelei. "Madam, sorry for the intrusion." The three men rode off, Thomas watching until they disappeared from sight before approaching the cabin. Lorelei set aside the rifle and rushed outside, propriety forgotten in her relief. "Thomas," she called. "Are you all right? What happened at the ranch?" He dismounted, his expression grave but softening at the sight of her. "Rustlers hit us hard, lost nearly 30 head before we drove them off." He nodded in the direction the men had ridden. "That was Jake Dalton and his crew. They've been causing trouble all through the territory. They're the rustlers. Can't prove it yet, but Reynolds is sure of it." Thomas turned to his companions. "Will, Mark, ride on to town. Tell the sheriff what we saw here." After the men departed, Thomas followed Lorelei inside, his gaze sweeping the cabin, noting changes she'd made: herbs hanging to dry, a new quilt on the bed, shelves reorganized. "You've been busy," he observed. "Had to keep occupied." She busied herself making coffee, suddenly shy. "I wasn't sure you'd come back." Thomas removed his hat, setting it on the table. "I gave my word, Lorelei." It was the first time he'd used her given name rather than Miss Barrett. The intimacy of it hung between them, changing something in the air. "I was worried," she admitted. "When you didn't return. Reynolds wouldn't spare me until we tracked down the missing cattle." He accepted the coffee she offered. "But I thought about you. Every day." The simple declaration stole her breath. In Boston, men had courted her with flowery words and grand gestures. Thomas's straightforward honesty affected her more deeply than any poetry. "The cabin felt empty without you," she confessed. His eyes met hers, the blue intensified by emotion. "I'm not sure I should stay." "Why?" "Because every day I spend here makes it harder to imagine leaving." He set down his cup. "I came to help you survive winter, not to." "Not to what, Thomas?" "Not to fall in love with you." The words emerged rough, as if dragged from someplace deep. "But I fear I already have." Lorelei's heart thundered in her chest. "I see." "Do you?" He stepped closer. "Because I have nothing to offer a woman like you. I'm just a hired hand with saddle sores and calluses. You're educated, refined. I'm a stubborn woman who nearly died from pride and inexperience," she interrupted. "A woman everyone said wouldn't survive winter." She moved toward him, stopping just short of touching. "But then a cowboy said, 'Not if I can help it,' and changed everything." Thomas's hand rose to her cheek, rough fingers gentle against her skin. "Lorelei, I never expected you," she whispered. "Never expected to find someone who sees me, truly sees me out here in this wilderness." His kiss was tentative at first, a question she answered by wrapping her arms around his neck, drawing him closer. When they finally parted, breathless, the world had irrevocably changed. "I need to return to the ranch tonight," he said reluctantly. "Reynolds needs every man with Dalton's crew prowling around, but I'll come back tomorrow." "I'll be here," she promised, "surviving quite well thanks to you." He touched her cheek once more. "You would have found a way, Lorelei Barrett. I just made the path a little smoother." The next month brought both challenges and joys. Thomas divided his time between ranch duties and Lorelei's homestead, helping her establish systems that would carry her through to spring. Together they built a proper chicken coop, repaired fencing, and cleared land for spring planting. On clear days, he took her riding across her property, showing her hidden springs and the best grazing areas, planning for future development. Their growing relationship didn't go unnoticed. Reynolds visited again in late January, bringing his wife Martha, who took an immediate liking to Lorelei. The older woman brought fabric, seeds for spring planting, and books treasures beyond measure in the isolated winter. "Thomas is a different man since meeting you," Martha confided as they prepared dinner together. "We've known him 5 years, never seen him smile so much." "He saved my life," Lorelei said simply. Martha patted her hand. "And you've given him something to live for beyond work." "Fair trade, I'd say." That evening, as the two couples sat by the fire sharing stories, Lorelei felt a sense of belonging she'd never experienced in Boston society. Here, worth was measured by character and contribution, not pedigree or wealth. Thomas caught her eye across the room, his smile private and warm, and she knew with certainty that she'd found her place in this harsh, beautiful land. February arrived with unexpected warmth, a false spring that melted snow and raised spirits. Lorelei's health continued to improve, her cough finally gone. Color returned to her cheeks. She began accompanying Thomas on his patrols of the property boundaries, learning to ride with confidence on a gentle mare he'd brought from the ranch. "You're becoming a proper frontierswoman," he teased as she expertly guided her horse across a narrow stream. "Still a long way from your skills," she replied, watching him track rabbit prints with casual expertise. "You'll get there." His confidence in her abilities never wavered. "By next winter, you'll be teaching newcomers how to survive." "Next winter seems a lifetime away," she mused. "So much will change by then." Thomas helped her dismount as they stopped to rest the horses. "What do you see for yourself, Lorelei, once spring comes and the road's clear?" The question held weight beyond the simple words. She considered carefully before answering. "I want to make this land productive, not just surviving but thriving." She gazed across the snow-patched landscape. "My uncle saw potential here. I'm beginning to see it too." "And Boston?" He asked quietly. "Your life there. That life ended when my parents died." She turned to face him. "This is my home now, whatever challenges it brings." Relief washed over his features. "I've been afraid you'd realize once winter passed that you belong back east among your own kind." "My own kind?" She raised an eyebrow. "You mean people who judge worth by family name, who believe a woman's highest achievement is making an advantageous marriage?" She shook her head. "I found more honesty and decency in this wilderness than in all of Boston society." Thomas took her gloved hands in his. "When I first saw you sick and struggling, I wanted to help because it seemed the right thing to do." His voice deepened with emotion. "I never expected you to become essential to me, like air, like water." "Thomas Blackwood," she said softly, "are you asking me something?" "I'm asking if you could see a future with a man like me, not today or tomorrow, but when you're ready." His eyes held both hope and uncertainty. "When your land is secure and you've had time to be certain." Lorelei stepped closer, her decision already made. "I've never been more certain of anything." Their kiss sealed promises neither needed to voice aloud. The vast landscape stretched around them, no longer a threat but a shared challenge they would face together. The peaceful interlude was shattered 2 days later when Will arrived at dawn, his horse lathered from hard riding. "Dalton's crew raided the south pasture last night," he reported breathlessly. "Shot Mark when he tried to stop them. Reynolds is gathering men to go after them." Thomas immediately began saddling his horse. "How bad is Mark hurt?" "Doc's with him, but it's serious. Through the shoulder." Will glanced at Lorelei. "Mrs. Reynolds says you should come to the main house, Miss Barrett. Not safe for you alone with those men on the loose." Thomas nodded. "He's right. Pack what you need for a few days." "No," Lorelei said firmly. "I won't be driven from my home by criminals." "Lorelei, please," Thomas urged. "This isn't about pride or independence. Dalton's dangerous and he's seen you, knows you're here alone most times. All the more reason I should stay, she argued. If I leave now, what's to stop them from burning everything to the ground? Everything we've worked for. Thomas recognized the determination in her eyes, the same determination that had first drawn him to her. 1 hour, he conceded. Pack your things. I'll bring the wagon around. As Will rode ahead to inform Reynolds, Thomas and Lorelei worked quickly to secure the homestead. They locked windows, barricaded the door, and hid valuables in the root cellar Thomas had helped dig beneath the kitchen floor. It's temporary, Thomas assured her as they loaded the wagon. Just until we deal with Dalton. How will you find them? She asked, concern evident in her voice. They could be anywhere in the territory by now. Sheriff thinks they're using an abandoned mining camp in the North Hills. Reynolds is organizing men from 3 ranches to ride out tomorrow. He helped her onto the wagon seat. With enough men, we can end this threat for good. The Double R ranch house was larger than Lorelei had imagined, a sprawling 2-story structure that spoke of years of successful ranching. Martha Reynolds welcomed her warmly, showing her to a comfortable guest room with views of the mountains. You'll be safe here, Martha assured her. We have ranch hands guarding the property day and night. Over dinner, Reynolds outlined the plan to confront Dalton's gang. 20 men from neighboring ranches would join forces at dawn, guided by a former gang member who'd agreed to lead them to the hideout in exchange for leniency. We'll bring them to justice, Reynolds promised. These raids have gone on long enough. Later, as Lorelei prepared for bed, Thomas knocked softly at her door. When she opened it, he stood in the hallway, his expression troubled. I don't like leaving you, he admitted. I'll be fine here with Martha and the house staff, she assured him. It's not just that. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Facing Dalton, it's dangerous work. I need you to know. Lorelei placed her fingers against his lips. Don't. No goodbyes or declarations before battle. That's bad luck. She tried to smile. Besides, you promised to help me survive winter. We still have weeks to go. Thomas caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. So I did, and I always keep my promises. His gaze held hers. Wait for me, Lorelei, however long it takes. Always, she whispered. Dawn broke cold and clear as the men gathered in the ranch yard. Lorelei watched from the porch as Thomas checked his rifle and ammunition, his face set in grim determination. Before mounting, he walked to where she stood, uncaring of the eyes watching them. 3 days, he said. 4 at most. She straightened his collar, a wifely gesture that felt both foreign and perfectly natural. Be careful, Thomas. Remember you have reasons to return safely. The best reasons, he agreed, kissing her briefly before turning to join the others. Lorelei watched until the riders disappeared over the distant ridge, Martha's reassuring presence beside her. They'll be fine, the older woman said, though worry lined her own face as she watched her husband lead the group. Richard knows these hills better than Dalton ever could. Of course they will, Lorelei agreed, praying her words would prove true. The first day passed slowly, Lorelei finding ways to make herself useful around the ranch house. She helped Martha with mending, assisted the cook with bread making, and organized the chaotic ranch ledgers using skills from her father's business training. On the second day, a blizzard descended without warning, turning the landscape white within hours. Martha paced anxiously by the windows, checking the horizon repeatedly though visibility was near zero. They'll seek shelter, she reassured Lorelei, though her voice betrayed her concern. Richard knows every cabin and cave in these hills. By the third day, with the storm still raging, worry had settled like a stone in Lorelei's chest. She found herself standing at the windows for hours, straining to see through the swirling snow, jumping at every sound that might herald the men's return. On the morning of the fourth day, the storm finally broke, revealing a transformed landscape. Drifts taller than a man surrounded the ranch house, making travel nearly impossible. Still, Lorelei watched and waited, hope warring with growing fear. Midday brought movement on the horizon, 3 riders struggling through the deep snow. As they drew closer, Lorelei recognized Reynolds in the lead, followed by 2 ranch hands. There was no sign of Thomas. Martha rushed outside as they approached, Lorelei close behind. Reynolds dismounted wearily, his face haggard with exhaustion. "Richard," Martha cried, embracing him. "Thank God you're safe. But the others?" "Taking shelter at the Morrison place," he explained, his voice hoarse. "The storm hit just as we found Dalton's camp. There was a gunfight, we got most of them, but Dalton and 2 others escaped in the blizzard." Lorelei stepped forward. "Thomas." Reynolds' expression softened with sympathy. "He went after Dalton, tracked him into the eastern canyon before the worst of the storm hit. Alone." Lorelei's voice cracked. "In that blizzard?" "Will and Johnson went after him when the weather cleared enough to travel," Reynolds assured her. "They're good trackers, if anyone can find him. If," the word echoed in Lorelei's mind, "if he's alive, if he hasn't frozen, if Dalton didn't ambush him." "I need to go to him," she said, already turning toward the stables. Reynolds caught her arm. "Impossible, Miss Barrett. The snow's too deep for a horse to manage without exhausting itself, and the temperature's dropping again. You wouldn't make it halfway to the canyon. I can't just wait here." She protested. Martha stepped between them. "No one's asking you to wait idly. We prepare. Food, medical supplies, warm clothes, everything they'll need when they return." She emphasized the when, her eyes holding Lorelei's. "Thomas is the best outdoorsman on the ranch. If anyone can survive out there, it's him." Reluctantly, Lorelei channeled her fear into action, helping prepare for the returning men. She boiled bandages, made broth, and gathered every spare blanket in the house. Working kept her hands busy, though her mind continued to conjure increasingly dire scenarios. Night fell with no sign of the missing men. Lorelei lay awake in the guest room, listening to the wind pick up again outside. Somewhere in that cold darkness was Thomas, perhaps injured, perhaps lost. Perhaps worse. The thought was unbearable. She must have drifted into uneasy sleep, for she woke suddenly to shouting from the yard. Throwing on a robe, she rushed downstairs and outside, heedless of the bitter cold. A group of riders had arrived, men supporting each other in various states of exhaustion and injury. Reynolds was directing them toward the house, Martha already organizing care for the wounded. Lorelei scanned each face desperately, searching for Thomas. "Miss Barrett," called Will, dismounting stiffly. "We found him." "Where?" she demanded, heart in her throat. Will pointed to the last horse, where 2 men were carefully lowering a third from the saddle. Even in the dim lantern light, she recognized Thomas's broad shoulders, though he hung limply between his supporters. Lorelei rushed forward. "Is he alive?" Will assured her quickly. "Shot in the leg and half frozen when we found him, but alive." They carried Thomas inside, laying him on a bed in the downstairs study. Martha was already cutting away his frozen pant leg, revealing an ugly wound high on his thigh. Dried blood crusted the edges, but fresh red seeped through when the fabric was removed. "Bullet went through clean," Reynolds observed. "But he's lost blood, and there's signs of frostbite on his hands and face." Lorelei knelt beside the bed, taking Thomas's cold hand in hers. His face was pale beneath his beard, lips tinged blue, but his chest rose and fell with steady breaths. "Thomas," she called softly. "Can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Martha handed Lorelei a cup of warm broth. Try to get some between his lips, she instructed. Warming from inside out is safest. For hours, Lorelei worked to bring warmth back to Thomas's body. She spooned broth into his mouth, wrapped hot bricks in flannel to place around him, and gently massaged his hands to restore circulation. Gradually, color returned to his face, though he remained unconscious. Dawn was breaking when his eyes finally opened, focusing slowly on her face. Lorelei. His voice was a hoarse whisper. "I'm here," she answered, tears of relief streaming down her cheeks. "You're safe now, Dalton. Don't worry about him now," she soothed. "Just rest." Thomas's hand tightened weakly around hers. "Need to tell you, found evidence in their camp, papers, deeds. They've been forcing homesteaders out, claiming abandoned properties." His breathing grew labored with the effort of speaking. "Your uncle's death wasn't an accident. Dalton's men." "SHH," she urged. "Reynolds knows. The sheriff is organizing a proper posse once the snow clears. They'll face justice." He relaxed slightly at this. "Should have been more careful, led them away from you. You nearly died doing it," she chided gently. A ghost of his familiar smile touched his lips. "Promise to help you survive winter. Wouldn't be much good to you dead." "No, you wouldn't," she agreed, brushing hair from his forehead. "So don't you dare try it again." Over the next week, Thomas slowly recovered his strength. The bullet wound began healing cleanly, and the frostbitten areas of his hands and face responded well to Martha's treatments. Lorelei rarely left his side, reading to him, changing his bandages, helping him take short walks around the room as he regained mobility. Reynolds received word that the territorial marshal was assembling a force to apprehend Dalton, who had fled across the border into Colorado territory. The immediate danger had passed, though everyone remained vigilant. "They found your uncle's deed among Dalton's papers," Reynolds told Lorelei one evening as they sat by Thomas's bedside, "along with forged documents transferring ownership to a company Dalton controlled. Seems they've been working this scheme for years, intimidating homesteaders, causing accidents, then claiming abandoned properties and selling them to mining interests." "So my uncle was murdered for his land," Lorelei said quietly. "Most likely," Reynolds confirmed. "But with the evidence recovered, your claim is ironclad now. No one will challenge your ownership." As February waned, Thomas grew strong enough to travel. The roads had been cleared sufficiently for Reynolds to offer his carriage to transport them back to Lorelei's homestead. "You're welcome to stay until Thomas is fully recovered," Martha insisted. "Thank you, but we've imposed long enough," Lorelei replied. "Besides, I'm anxious to see what's become of my place." The homestead stood untouched, protected by its isolation and the severe weather that had kept even rustlers close to their hideouts. Thomas insisted on being the first to enter, leaning on a cane but determined to ensure all was safe. "Home sweet home," he announced, holding the door for Lorelei. The cabin was cold but intact. Within hours, they had a fire blazing and food warming on the stove. Thomas sat at the table, watching as Lorelei moved comfortably around the space that had once nearly claimed her life. "Strange to think how different things were the first time I walked through that door," he observed. "You half dead from illness, the cabin freezing, winter just beginning." "Now spring's almost here," she replied, setting a cup of coffee before him. "And we both survived." "Against the odds," he agreed, "just like they said you wouldn't." Lorelei sat beside him, taking his hand. "Thomas, when you were missing in that blizzard, I realized something." "What's that?" "Life out here is uncertain, dangerous. Any day could be our last." Her fingers traced the healing cuts on his knuckles. "I don't want to waste a moment of whatever time we have." Thomas's eyes searched hers. "What are you saying, Lorelei?" "I'm saying I don't want to wait until some arbitrary right time to build our life together." She straightened her shoulders, Boston propriety giving way to frontier directness. "I'm asking you to marry me, Thomas Blackwood, as soon as the preacher can get here when the road's clear." For a moment, he simply stared at her, amazement written across his features. Then laughter warm and genuine filled the cabin. "What's funny?" she demanded, suddenly uncertain in answer. Thomas reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small leather pouch. From it, he produced a simple gold ring. "I bought this in town before the Dalton business," he explained. "Carried it with me every day since, waiting for the right moment." He held it out to her. "Seems you found it before I did." Joy bubbled up inside her as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "Is that a yes, Mr. Blackwood?" "That's a yes, Miss Barrett," he confirmed, pulling her close for a kiss that held all the promise of their future. They were married on the first day of March, 1879, with the Reynolds standing as witnesses. The ceremony was simple, performed in Lorelei's cabin by a circuit-riding preacher who combined their wedding with 3 baptisms and 2 funerals during his brief visit to the area. Spring arrived in earnest as they settled into married life. Thomas officially left his position at the Double R, though he maintained a close friendship with Reynolds, who proved invaluable in advising them on developing Lorelei's land. Together, they planted fields, expanded the chicken coop into a proper henhouse, and acquired a small herd of cattle as the foundation for their own ranching operation. News reached them in late April that the Marshal's posse had cornered Dalton in a Denver saloon. He died in the ensuing gunfight, ending his reign of terror over the territory. The other members of his gang received prison sentences for their crimes, including conspiracy in the death of Lorelei's uncle. "I never expected justice for him," Lorelei told Thomas as they stood on their porch watching the sunset. "He was just a lonely old man who died far from home." "He'd be proud of what you've accomplished here," Thomas assured her, his arm around her waist. "His dream lives on through you." "Through us," she corrected, leaning into his embrace. "I never would have survived without you." "You underestimate yourself," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "But I'm grateful fate brought me to your door that day." As summer bloomed across the land, so did their prosperity. The crops flourished, the cattle grew fat on rich grass, and their reputation as fair but shrewd business partners spread throughout the region. Lorelei's education proved invaluable in managing accounts and negotiating contracts, while Thomas's practical skills and understanding of the land guided their physical development of the property. They named their growing enterprise the Promise Ranch, a testament to the vow Thomas had made that winter day, and kept through every challenge since. In August, when the wildflowers painted the meadows in brilliant colors, Lorelei shared news that brought tears to Thomas's eyes. "A baby," he whispered, hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "By spring, doctor says late March or early April," she confirmed. "Our first winter as 3 instead of 2. Thomas gathered her in his arms, his joy palpable. "Another promise to keep then. Our child will never know the hardships we faced, but will know the strength that saw us through them," Lorelei added. "The strength of 2 people who refused to let winter defeat them." As the wheel of seasons turned once more toward autumn, Lorelei often thought about that desperate woman she'd been a year earlier, sick, alone, afraid. How strange that her darkest moment had led to her greatest happiness. The frontier had nearly killed her, then given her everything she'd never known she wanted: purpose, partnership, love. When December returned with its biting winds and early snowfall, Lorelei stood at the same window where she'd once watched Thomas ride into her life. Now, she watched him lead their horses into the newly built barn, his movements confident and familiar. Inside, their cabin was warm and well stocked, the pantry full, the woodpile high. They said I wouldn't survive winter, she murmured, hands cradling the gentle swell of her growing child. Outside, Thomas looked up, somehow sensing her gaze. He smiled and waved, the simple gesture conveying all the love and commitment that had transformed both their lives. But they didn't count on your father, she told her unborn child. They didn't know what happens when a good man says, "Not if I can help it," and means it with all his heart. As Thomas entered, stamping snow from his boots, Lorelei moved into his waiting arms, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, just as they had that first desperate winter when love bloomed against all odds in the wild Wyoming wilderness. Years later, when their homestead had grown into one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory, with 3 children running across meadows that once seemed so threatening, Lorelei would still tell the story of that first winter of illness and desperation, of a stranger's kindness, and of love that defied death and distance. They said I wouldn't survive winter, she would tell their children as Thomas listened from his favorite chair by the fire, his smile still able to warm her from across the room. But your father said, "Not if I can help it," and that made all the difference in the world.